So it's lovely to be with you today. I'm Christine Towers. I think I hopefully met quite a few of you at the last session. I saw a few messages saying that people would like the last session. I think it's all on the LDE website, but we can let you know about that. I run an organisation called Together Matters, which I've been doing for the past 4 years. And before that, I worked at the Foundation for People with Learning Disabilities for about 10 years, and have worked with people with learning disabilities and families for about 35 years. And emergency planning has been a bit of a theme through my working life from about my late 20s. So it's really lovely to be doing this webinar for Learning Disability England. Are we going to start with the first question, Rachel?
I've just launched it. Hopefully you should all be able to see a poll pop up.
So we thought it'd be really helpful to know who's at the webinar, because it helps with understanding your poll question. We've only got 3 questions. This is the first of 3. So if you could just say which you fall into, it might just the nearest category, or just put other if we really haven't captured what you do, who you are. So, okay, that's really helpful actually. So over 50% of people are family carers. Well, 60% of people really are family carers, which is what I suppose we probably thought might be the case. But then we've got people working in a whole range of different organisations and roles. So that's great. Okay, can I get rid of that by end polling, or will you leave it? So we haven't done polling before. Well, I haven't done polling before.
No, I haven't either. So
you have to bear with us
properly. Yeah.
I just close it, or you close it? Okay, so I'm going to. Could people see the results of that, or was it just you and I that could see the results of that? Oh, okay, okay. Okay, so I'm going to, as Rachel said, I'm going to talk through emergency planning, and then the idea is to have questions at the end. So it's just much easier to keep going and then just take the questions at the end. So just put your questions into the chat, and Rachel's going to keep an eye on those. Sorry, we've done that. Okay, so sorry, it's just taking me a minute to get all organised. I'm going to put the picture. Okay. So as Rachel said, the previous webinar was on planning the future use based on the Thinking Ahead guides, and today it's one area of that guide which covers emergency planning. So I'm going to talk a bit about why emergency planning is important, things to think about when making a plan, 7 steps to make an emergency plan. Those are the 7 steps in the Thinking Ahead guide. I'm going to talk about an additional guide I wrote during COVID about emergency planning. There'll be information about how to get copies of all the guidance and templates that I talk about, and it's all free to download. So there'll be a link to all that at the end. And then, as I said, we'll take questions at the end. So for those of you who weren't at the previous webinar, this is a visual diagram of what's in the Thinking Ahead planning guide. And as you'll see over on the left is making a plan for emergencies. So these are all the different bits of the jigsaw really that are in the Thinking Ahead guide and help families to plan for the future. And so many of the other areas in the guide will contribute to making an emergency plan. So obviously the making decisions section is very important, the making plans for a future and person-centered way, building friendships and support networks, those all help with making an emergency plan. But you can go straight in and look at the section on making a plan for emergencies. It sits on its own and will make complete sense. So what is an emergency plan? I mean, I actually think there is a lack of clarity about emergency planning, which is sometimes called contingency planning, which adds to the confusion. But basically for me, an emergency plan is something that sets out information and ideas that help your relative with a learning disability to cope if you or another family carer are unable to give the usual support. So I've put some examples there. When I first started doing emergency planning, I think it was much more a case of when people lived at home, still lived at home with their families. But increasingly with people being still very family carers, still being very involved in the sort of support network of people when they leave home, is where if they're living in their own flat or in supported living. I think the emergency plan is equally as relevant, and with COVID's really highlighted that the whole way the support families normally gave to people, and how that could still happen during COVID. And the other thing is people with learning disabilities are often carers as well. And over the years, we've done quite a lot of work around thinking about recognising people with learning disabilities as carers. That might be for an older parent, it might be for a partner, it might be for a friend. They might have a adult child with learning disabilities. So yeah, so I'm going to come back to talk a little bit more about that as well. Rachel, because I'm co-host, I'm getting all these messages popping up, which is really distracting, of people joining and things like that. Is it possible just to turn me off as co-host? Well, not.
Yeah, let me see if I can do that for you. Sorry, I didn't think about that.
I think what's going on. So I think it's really helpful to think why an emergency plan is helpful. It's not just a tick box exercise, and I think people might feel I'm being critical, but sometimes it feels like that's what they become. But to me, they're really practical tools that help in emergency. They're a bit more than just, who might someone contact. I think one of the issues is that it's really hard to think clearly in an emergency. When we're panicked, our brain function just changes and we go into fight and flight. At that point, it's so hard to think, what would make sense to do, who to contact, how that might work. And I think to enter into, if you're unwell, seriously unwell, and you're worrying about if your relative is going to be okay, it's a really, really difficult situation. So I think that whole thing about getting that written down and knowing other people will step in is so important. The other thing is around so many emergencies can get dealt with at sort of 5 o'clock in the afternoon or out of hours, but if your plan's written down, you at least get to shape what happens, and you ask people that you know and that you trust to do the best they can to advocate for your relative. So there's no guarantee what you put in the plan will be put into practice, but it's much more likely if you have done this work. The other thing I have seen time and time again is how much anxiety is caused by anxieties for a person with a learning disability, and it can lead to sort of behaviour change. And if someone's giving support who doesn't know them, I think a lot of assumptions get made about who they are and what they're like. It's partly why I've put that image of a spiral staircase going down, because I have met people where it feels like an emergency has led to a bit of a downward spiral, and they've ended up with much higher levels of support in sort of probably more restricted environments that they need to be, because people haven't really understood what they need just to cope, really. And the other thing is, I think even having an emergency plan, even if you never put it into practice, it's just families have said to me, I feel so relieved I've done that. I don't really mind if I use it or not, or obviously you hope you're not going to use it, but it's worth doing it just to have that peace of mind for the time being. So I've just, in a nutshell, for me, an emergency plan is, we can't stop emergencies happening. They will happen in people's lives. What we can do is do our best to stop an emergency turning into a crisis. And the things in the emergency plan should help to manage what could be a difficult situation. And I think one of the things for me is really making the plan personal to your family, so it works for you and your relative. And I think that's one of the, maybe the difficulties sometimes about making plans, that some of the, when local systems are set up, but they're quite generic, they don't feel very personal to people, and people don't really feel it's going to meet their needs if there was a plan. So I think I'll talk a bit more, but there's something about, even if you're using the local authority or the local system, there's something about really gathering very individual information that would work for your family, and thinking about how it might get implemented within your family, and all those sort of practical considerations. And the things that really, the two elements of it are planning support that would work well in an emergency, and gathering useful information for anyone who steps in. So those are the two really crucial elements. So I was just going to say a little bit quickly about being recognised as a family carer, because obviously that's one element of getting support in an emergency situation. But it's just important to know carers can ask for a carer's assessment. And it would be interesting to know how many carers in the group have actually had a carer's assessment or had it updated. One of the things I'm aware of, that a lot of people feel their carer's role has changed with COVID. It's made them rethink what feels safe and what, how they feel about the situation they're in, where they're providing care. And so I think maybe not post-COVID, but in this sort of continuing COVID situation, people's thoughts might have changed about their caring role, and it's really good to think about updating your carer's assessment. It's also good to be registered with your GP as a carer, and to make sure your relative is also on their record. It also says that you're their carer. And I mean, particularly important to let people know if you care on your own, because I think I think emergency plans are important for anyone, wherever your family makeup. But obviously for people who are a sole carer, it can feel there isn't so much immediate backup available. And just to sort of continue with that, the idea around assessment, if you do have a care assessment, there should be a discussion about an emergency plan. And if not, you should raise the issue. It's always good to prepare for a carer's assessment and have that on your list. Have had some thinking about the emergency plan, and discuss it, bring it up if it isn't brought up. And there's often also a discussion at a relative's care and support planning meeting and or reviews. So again, a good chance, if you're working on an emergency plan and think about some of the ideas we talk about today, it's a good place to take them back, talk with your relative about them, and then talk about how you bring them up in the in those planning meetings. The other thing to think about is at care and support planning is could some of the outcomes in the care and support plan be things that would help in an emergency situation. So an example of that is someone I met who was a man who lived he lived with his mum, who was like in her 80s. And his mum actually did a lot for him, but he was actually very able to do things. He did the shopping, but he didn't do the cooking. So we looked at, in a support plan, putting in that the support worker worked with him to learn to cook, because their plan was really that he could stay living in a flat that they lived in together, and but yeah, he would need more skills. So that, again, what that would look like would vary. So it's again thinking what would work for your relative, what might be helpful for them. So it might be something as simple as like using a phone to call for help, something like that, or yeah. So I was just talking a little bit more about carers with a learning disability. There's a resource that was written within the work of the Valuing People team, which many of you will remember, talking about 15, 20 years ago, I think it was written. But it's an easy read carers assessment. And again, I think if anyone is supporting people with a learning disability or a carer, it's a good pack to use to talk through some of these issues. It's It is actually on the Together Matters website. It's under the section around people with learning disabilities as carers. So it's good that it's really good if that is still used. It was a good resource that was. So I've already touched on this a bit, the local authority variations. And I do think this is one of the problems, that local strategy and processes are not to get an emergency plan. There's huge variation in them, and they're not always clear to family carers. And probably some people who work in carers organisations might be working with different systems in different parts of the area they cover. And the other thing that regularly comes up is family carers often say the planning format is not learning disability friendly. Well, I was doing some planning with people last week, and one parent said they'd looked at their local areas and she just said that was her phrase, it's not learning disability friendly. And I think often that means there's not enough detail to actually think about how their relative might be supported in an emergency. But I do think it's really useful to find out about the local scheme and register with it. Use what the local scheme offers, but probably usually it's necessary to do more. I think there are some examples of good emergency planning, and one I looked at quite a few years ago, I found, and I just looked at it recently, and it looks like that probably is still a good local scheme that probably is good at thinking and including people with learning disabilities. But I'm not going to say about that because I was hoping I might get a chance to talk to them beforehand. But I'd be really interested, actually, if anyone's working somewhere where they think there is a good scheme, be really interested in hearing about it. Because I think it's good that we try and find a good practice and share it. So there's a bit more consistency around emergency planning. I think that would be quite helpful. So the second question is, do you know how carers are supported in your area to make an emergency plan? So some of the things about, you know, who would you ask if you wanted to make a plan? Which services responsibility for giving support to make a plan? Where would it be stored? How would it be updated?
I don't know if you can hear me. My computer's not really working and the screen's just...
Oh, you have disappeared, Rachel.
Yeah, my screen is completely blank and I can't get it back on. And I don't want to knock the computer off. I'm just trying to get on another computer.
Oh dear.
So maybe if people could put it in the chat for now, and I will try and get back on and get the poll there. Sorry.
Are people okay to do that? To say, so the three options are, I've got a clear idea, I've got a rough idea, I don't know. That could be 1, 2, 3 if that's easy for people. So the first one's 1, the second one's 2, the third one's 3. If that's not working to do, we can always come back to the question. I think it's really interesting to know how well people feel. Ah, it's come up.
There we go. Sorry, everyone. I'm on my second laptop. I'm not sure what's happened with my first one.
Are people able to fill that in now then? Sorry, if you probably already started doing the chat bit. I think it's easier if we do that. You okay, Rachel?
Yeah, for some reason my screen's just gone blank and it won't come back on, but I'm recording on that computer, so I don't want to knock it off and try again.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happened, but so looking at the poll results, it looks like about 56% of you guys don't know. Only 16% have got a clear idea, and 28% have got a rough idea.
Right. Sorry, I should have said that's probably a question for family carers only, because hopefully all the other people do know what the system is in their local area. Okay, that's really useful. Do you want to stop? Can you remove that? Yeah, thanks. My screen isn't letting me move on. Just, I think might just have to give it a few seconds, sorry. We had no problems last time, did we, Rachel?
It all went too smoothly, I think.
It did, it went surprisingly smoothly. My screen won't move on. Is that anything that's happened with anything else, or?
I don't think so. You're still moving and everything.
Yeah, no, it's come back.
There we go. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So within the Thinking Ahead planning guide, there's a structure for making a plan, and it hopefully is family friendly. So the different stages are thinking might help you draw up a plan, think about possible emergencies that might arise, put cushions in place beforehand. I'm going to talk a bit more about cushions. Think about who might help in an emergency, look at the support options in an emergency, gather person-centered information, and then make a to-do list to start getting going with it and to keep that motivation. And there's also a template to get the plan written down. So I'm going to go through the different steps. And before I do, there's a few things to think about before making a plan. So I keep emphasizing it can be the simple things that actually help to prevent an emergency plan getting becoming a bit of a crisis. So it might be things, some of the things, someone who really had a lot of anxiety, and his mum was really worried actually about getting going into sort of emergency hospital treatment. One of the things she looked at was his brother phoning him at certain points in the day, because he was a very reassuring voice and reassuring person. So just build that in. So it's quite a simple thing, but if everybody knows that's what needs to happen, that's really useful. A parent last week said to me, one thing that would be really important for her son would be having the right things in his lunchbox. And if that wasn't right, it would really cause a lot of anxiety and kind of reinforce the anxiety of the emergency situation having happened. I mean, you're not going to remove all anxiety, obviously, because emergencies often just do cause that anxiety. I've put there, if you care for more than one person, make a separate plan for each person. It's really important, even if you think the same thing might happen for both people, but just there will be individual information, and it might be that a lot of it can be duplicated in the way you do it, but make sure there is a separate plan for each person. It probably sounds obvious, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Then there's quite a few practical issues to think about. And I think this is where, again, emergency plans often come a bit unstuck, because it's all about information sharing and information updating and information storage. And they're quite complicated issues that probably people have never quite sorted out in relation to lots of things. But I think that what you need to think about this is in relation to your family. You might use the local scheme, and it might be that a lot of information is registered with that scheme, which is helpful. But think about what format you want the emergency plan to be in. So usually I think nowadays they would be digital, but some people would still want hard copies, or you might want to do both. You need to, in terms of storage, you need to think about both about information being secure, but also being accessible to people who may need to use it, and people knowing about it. That's another crucial thing. And how to share with statutory support services and with your informal support networks. So there's different kinds of information sharing that's needed. And then the question about how and when it will be reviewed and updated, because there could be crucial information in there that would need regularly looking at. So going back to the sort of 7 steps that I talked about, the first one that is important, I think, is try not to make a plan on your own. There's many ways of involving other people. Obviously, best starting point is talk with your relative about ideas you both have. And I know talking about emergency might feel difficult. I might feel, you know, you'd be raising someone's anxiety. Interesting, someone whose son is very anxious, they said to me the other day, we were talking about emergency planning. She said, I think actually I can see if my son was involved in the emergency planning and could own it, it would really help him with his anxiety about something like that happening. Obviously talk with close family. You could get a group of people together, some maybe family, friends, neighbours. I think neighbours are often good people just to tap into. You might know your neighbours, you might not know them that well, but think about how they might help. It might be that they hold a key, or your relative could, they might pop in and support your relative if you weren't home at a certain time, things like that. Again, get advice from care organisations, social workers, and as I've said before, share ideas at carers assessment, care support planning meetings and annual reviews. So I just think the more people who give an input and ask you questions, and you can think what would work, what wouldn't work for us, the more robust the plan is going to be, which is kind of what you're aiming for, something that's will stand up when it's tested. So the next bit of the process for me is thinking about what emergencies might happen. So this again makes it a bit more concrete rather than just trying to think abstractly, oh, an emergency might happen. You might have previously had emergencies, and families sometimes find it really useful to think about what that was, what caused it, what support was there, what worked, what didn't work, and what could we put in place if a similar emergency happened. Yeah, so that's a useful thing to do. I mean, sometimes you're maybe caring for an elderly parent, or you've got underlying health problems, so you may suddenly need to rush to hospital, or go to another area to look after a parent that's perhaps who's not well. So you might then be able to think in those situations what would work. So the more concrete you can make it, I think, again, it helps it to be stronger. So I mentioned about cushions a bit earlier on, and many years ago, probably actually at the time, Family People, when we did some work around older families. And I think it's an idea that families often say to me, they really like the idea of it. So the idea of a cushion is that it gives protection, or I think of it as softening the fall by putting things in place now. The things you can get on with now, put them in place, and if an emergency comes up, they will hopefully make things go more smoothly. There's a checklist in the Thinking Ahead guide which you could use to help you think about what cushions might be helpful. I have to say, I think it's slightly out of date now. I think I'm looking to update that a little bit, but it's still really useful to trigger ideas. I think one of the things which we've moved on with is technology. So there's sort of more things, I think, probably to help that can be put in place now more easily. But think about your own ideas that would work for your family. And again, it's interesting when I do workshops on emergency planning, families come up with lots of interesting ideas. I think maybe I should just make a huge list of all the ideas people have come up with and put that on the website. So here's some examples of cushions. So one thing to think about is families, friends and neighbours. I think that informal support network in an emergency is very useful, especially maybe as an interim. It might be that it is the answer anyway, but it might be the more immediate support that can be organised. So one of the things is, making a list of all the names and contact details of family and friends who might help in emergency, and share them with each other. It's one of the things about emergency planning is getting the information out of your head and sharing it with others so they can use it. So if they've all got each other's numbers, or they've been introduced to each other, they can phone each other and start to sort things out between themselves. Emergency key holders, think about who amongst your family and neighbours and friends have got key holders, and again, have a note of that so people can be told, and make sure those people know you have the plan and where it is and how it can be accessed. And then it might be that you don't want to share all the details in the emergency plan with everybody, but you might choose some key people who are family and friends that that can access the vital information and the person-centered information that you've collected. And one of the things about thinking about family, friends and neighbours is to begin to build a support network. And I think COVID again has made us really think about who's in our support network and who can we tap into when we need a bit of help. So another set of questions I've put in here, there's some other ones in the guide, is thinking about information and technology. Yeah, Father just last week said, when we were talking about emergency planning, said, I'm going to set up a WhatsApp group for the emergency support network. So I thought that was a good idea. I think Zoom, again, we've all got more familiar with that. Really useful way for people to come together to develop an emergency plan. But also, you know, if your relative gets familiar with Zoom, then that could be a way of them getting reassurance from family and friends and people who support them if an emergency happens. So a cushion could be actually to get Zoom onto well, you've all got Zoom, but you know, to have that and your relative to be able to use it. Then there's things to think about, like remote technology such as call buttons and fall detectors. So again, thinking about how you get help, how people call for help, and that could be the family care or it could be the person with a learning disability. And so I think there are more apps and things around now that people are talking about and using. Carers UK have an app called Jointly, which aids chat and coordination between family, friends and those who share the care. So that's got a facility for group messaging, to-do lists, medication lists. So I haven't used that, but it looks that could be a really useful app for some people, and I've put the link in. So the next stage is who might help out in emergency. And the template for the relationship map, or people in my life, is again in thinking ahead, and there's an interactive version, so you can actually write the names on there in there electronically. And the relationship map's a good way of thinking who's in your relative's life, and then think who of those people might help in an emergency in small ways, in larger ways. It doesn't really matter, but if you kind of map everybody, then you begin to get a picture, and you'll probably think of things you hadn't thought about. So you might think of someone and then just suddenly think, actually, they could be a key holder, or they'd be a really good person to phone my relative and chat to them, or they're a really good organizer. They could be the sort of bit of a coordinating role. If say I suddenly had to rush to hospital, I'll phone them and they can get everyone else organized. So it's really, I think it's a useful tool to get started about thinking who might help out in an emergency. And I think if you're thinking about options, it's really good to think about a mixture of informal and paid support if you possibly can. A long time ago, when I was doing this with a group of families, a parent said we did a follow-up workshop and she'd gone away, she'd used the relationship map. What she'd done was put a photograph of everybody in the relationship map of people who would help in an emergency and put their phone number, and then she photocopied it and shared it amongst everyone, and she had a copy on her fridge. I thought that was such a nice, it's like an emergency plan in itself, very simple, effective way of getting a lot of information into one place and making information really accessible to people. So the next bit in the Thinking Ahead guide is look at the support options in an emergency. So there's things about thinking about what support would work for immediate support. So someone who could hold the fort until maybe something that would be more robust could be sorted out. So it might be a relative who lives further away, a sibling, or someone who would always come and help, but they live too far away. They need some time, you know, it might take 24 hours to get there, you know, to sort their lives out to get there. Or it might be, you know, a respite service, an outreach service in your local area that would step in, but it might not be immediate. One of the things to think about is, could your relative stay at home with additional support? So I think that's a really good thing to talk about in care and support plan meetings, you know, to think about what support the relative would need to do that, so that could already be kind of thought about in principle and seen as a really good option. I think often staying at home is less disruptive for someone, and in terms of anxiety, often being in a familiar environment is helpful. Not always. Some families have said, my son or daughter would hate to be at home and I wasn't there. They'd rather go somewhere else. So it's just thinking those things through and thinking what option would be least stressful for your relative. So there's a template to go through the different options. It looks at what could happen in the first few hours, what could happen in the first 24 hours, and it helps you just to think through. It gives you structure to think through the process. So the next step in the guide is about gathering person-centered information. And I think often emergency planning emphasizes sort of essential information, things like medication, services people use, and they're obviously really important information. But I think there's another side to that as well, of having the person-centered information so people understand your relative and help people to actually make good decisions that work for them, and or for somewhat really useful information for someone to step into a support role. So there's quite a few templates in the Thinking Ahead guides that would help. So there's an image there of the think about what you need to keep safe and well. So that's an example, and then there's a template on the next page. And there's similarly about so that's about keeping someone safe and well. And then there's information about what would help them have a good life. So I think in terms of emergency, it's thinking about what do they enjoy, what would help them to relax or reduce that anxiety. So that would be the person-centered tools would really help to think about that. I think tools like what makes a good day, what makes a bad day, really helpful quick way of people understanding what not to do and what would really be supportive to do. And daily routine, if daily routine is important to a person, then it's really good to describe that so that people can follow it. And that might be from the point of someone waking up, and really detailed information about ways someone likes, to get up, to have breakfast, whatever it might be, the whole day, what makes the day go well. Obviously, it's important to involve your relative as much as possible in all these in gathering all this information, and ask them who else they would like to contribute, because people who they know might have good ideas about what good support looks like for them. So again, it's just really involving people and getting various views as much as possible. I know that's not always easy, but I think it's surprising once people get a little bit pushed to do that, they find actually people really willing to think about it and help with it. So then, apart from the person-centered information, which I mentioned, there's other essential information. So again, it would depend on your relative needs, what information we'd need to share. So there would be things like up-to-date contact details of health services being used, up-to-date details of social care services and support services being used. And I think it's really useful to include how in your local authority, the duty social work team, whatever's the emergency number, because often other people would not even know where to begin to look for that if they're not, you've all been involved in all this, you understand a bit about how the system works, but some people who haven't done that, they don't know how the system works, they wouldn't know necessarily where to go. So any information that just directs people and helps them to do things quickly and not feel a bit overwhelmed is really helpful. Other essential information, cultural and religious needs, medication lists, things like food allergies, even food likes and dislikes. And you might already have quite a lot of this essential information in other places. So you might have, obviously, care and support plan, you might have communication passport, hospital passport, and those are things you could have copies of with your emergency plan. So that's all in one place. So there's sort of other backup information as well. It's just made me think, one person mentioned putting all this stuff in a Dropbox. So all these things are together and giving access to the few key people to access the information. So the final bit is in the plan, in the Thinking Ahead guide, is keeping going and making a to-do list. Because one of the things I think it is hard to make an emergency plan. It's in amongst everything else that needs doing. It's also quite an emotional thing to do for some family carers, because it's thinking about, you know, not being well, not being able to provide the care they normally do. So it suggests making a to-do list. I am someone who likes to-do lists because it keeps me on track, and I can easily forget about things and I can lose my motivation. But I do really, I know I work well with prompts, and I know a lot of other families have said they're the same. Not everyone is, but anyway, it does suggest making a to-do list and writing things down that you want to get on with now. So the other thing, apart from those 7 steps, is there is a template in the Thinking Ahead guide. And then there is a sort of hard copy that you could print off and write in, you know, handwriting, or there's a version you can fill in as you can fill in online, and then you can save it and update it. Obviously, that makes far more sense to use it like that. So in that guide, in that template, at the first few pages, there are a summary. Some of that also obviously essential details about names and stuff like that. But then there's a bit of a summary of what you would want to happen. Then the later pages are a template to work through really and fill more detailed information in, and then go back to the summary, fill the later pages in first, and then think, oh yes, this is what we would say is our first option, our second option. So that's sort of how it works. There's also the templates, which I've mentioned a bit as we've gone along, in both the Thinking Ahead and I'm Thinking Ahead guide. So there's what makes a good day, bad day, there's the relationship map, and then really all of I'm Thinking Ahead, which covers how to plan. So it's got person-centered planning templates in there, how to make choices, so you could gather information about how your relative makes choices, and then housing and support, which might sound not so relevant, but actually there's some things in there about how someone might want to live. So even doing that might make you think, oh, that's actually where my relative is saying would actually work well for them, if even for short-term support, some short-term place to go and live. Right, so we now come up to our third question. I'm hoping Rachel is all right. So our third question is, well, there's 2 questions. So we've divided this depending who you are. So if you're a family carer, do you think this step-by-step approach that I've just gone through would help you to make an emergency plan or improve on your existing emergency plan? And so you can say a lot, a little, not really. And similarly, if you support carers or you're developing support for carers, you manage social work teams, whatever, if you have more of that role in helping carers, do you think this step-by-step approach could be helpful with emergency planning in the sort of systems you've got? And again, it's a lot, a little, not really. If people say not really, it would be really helpful, and you feel free to say not really, but just it would be really good to get an explanation, or an explanation about any of them, to be honest, to put it into the chat as well. And just, yeah, to say which, just to say questions 3 and then just give a little bit of an explanation. Okay, so I'll just give you a few minutes to have a think about that.
Kim's just pointing out a failure that I was unaware of, that you have to answer both to get through.
Oh, right. Oh.
Sorry, we're new to polls and I didn't realise that it would do that.
Is there any way around it?
No,
there isn't really, because we won't know who.
No, because I can't edit it.
Actually, if people put
live.
this, oh yeah. Maybe we should just ask family carers to do it then and say, answer it, and just put the same answer in the second one, but we'll ignore it, if you see what I mean. Would that work? Or just forget it?
Yeah, or just stick something
really
in the chat, guys, whatever's easiest.
if you're a family carer, you could answer the first question 1 and just put the same answer into question 2, and then it will accept. That's what you're saying, isn't it, Rachel? It would accept it then. Yeah. We can't do it twice. We can't really do. I am really interested to know if, the other group as well, so, but I can't see a way around getting 2 sets of answers.
The general theme is I'm getting results, but I mean, I'm not sure how you know, how accurate it all is now that we've found that problem. But largely, people are saying a lot,
Right.
like 85% plus kind of thing. And we've got a couple of people saying a little, and a couple of people saying not really. So yeah, do stick the not really explanations into the chat if you think that would be
because that will really help us to think how it could be better, or well, I'm really sorry to everyone else that we can't get your views, but because we would have really liked those as well. Okay, do you want to?
Is that gone?
Yeah, I've got back to my. It seems to take a few minutes for my screen to start working after the poll. I think it's been good having polls, but it's obviously technically more challenging. Anything you can do to help me move on?
I'm not sure. No, I don't think so, unless you want to come out of sharing and go back in. That might be the only other option.
Still not going. Still not moving, actually. I think it just takes a few minutes. I think it just needs to readjust. We need something to talk about while that's happening. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about a different bit of guidance around emergency planning. So this was some I wrote. It's a bit of the COVID lockdown, because I realised initially I put out the emergency planning that I've just been talking about, and then I realised, oh, I did that quickly, but then I sort of said do this bit and that bit, sort of emphasise what might be the useful during COVID. But then I thought, oh, there's a much bigger picture here, and devised. I mean, it was put together quite quickly, really, but a structure to help families think about different emergencies that might come up. So you'll see it's got a similar format. Think about who you can talk to help you make a plan. Think about what you're most worried about, and just get on and do some of the useful things now, which a lot of that was really probably about gathering information and reading information, so you were prepared for things. So then instead of the emergency just being about a family carer or a main carer becoming unable to provide that role, it looked at different options that might happen. So those are the 4 arrows going down on that diagram. So there was information about coping with staying at home and social isolating. Then there was information in case you or others who support your relative become ill. Then in case your relative becomes ill, and then following on from that, in case your relative needs to go to hospital. So a lot of it was trying to pull together information that was coming out from all sorts of angles and was really quite hard to keep up with, and bits of advice that I felt, oh, it'd be really useful if families knew that, because families were quite anxious about a number of things. So obviously the situation slightly, it has moved on, although we still don't know if we might go back to a similar situation and feel going to lockdown, and obviously COVID is still about, so these options about becoming ill are still there. So I think it was really just to tell you that this is there, and it's really useful to look at it. Some of the guidance might have changed, might have been out of date. I haven't had a chance to look at that. But again, there's some templates in there to get down essential information so that other people can know your thoughts and use it if needs be. Yeah, I think it's really useful to read. There's some things I'm going to talk about, a couple of the things that are in there. But I mean, one of the things it does talk about is on links to a paper about reasonable adjustments. And it felt like if someone went into hospital, it's really useful for families to know about what reasonable adjustments mean and how to use that term to get the right support for your relative. So I think it's really worth, it is, I really think it's worth having a read through and pulling out the bits that are useful for you. So some of the things that were being talked about during COVID really seem to chime with ideas in the Thinking Ahead guide. Obviously, the whole thing about having up-to-date and person-centered information about a person, and so that either people who need to step in have got that information, or if something happened, like someone needing to go to hospital, it could easily be adapted for that. So it felt that person-centered information was really crucial. The other thing that we all talked about so much was about informal support networks. And again, it felt that must be something really in people's minds a lot during COVID. So some of the planning around, who are the families and friends that might step in? How am I linked to local community groups? How do I get shopping done, collect prescriptions, etc.? So those are still, I think, really valid questions, COVID or not. So, and then also knowing, again, that council's emergency number and contact numbers of support services, so to share those with other people. So there's a lot of the thinking from the other planning would be helpful with this as well. So a couple of things, I just picked out a couple of things. So in hospital admissions, it talked about being prepared for emergency hospital admissions. But again, a lot of this applies to planned, sorry, my screen just keeps going on, as well as planned appointments and planned admissions. So one of the things is writing a hospital passport. I think most family carers do know about this now, but just in case people don't, it's really useful to have got that written and to keep it updated. And again, I think hospital passport on these things, there's a lot of local variations. It's a case of finding out maybe what is used locally. I think most areas probably do have a local one, but I don't know if that's true in every area. I think, the way to find out is ask the local community learning disability health team. I've also included a link to MenCat website where they've got some general information and a template. There's a lot of templates out there. Some are definitely so much better than other ones. So, good to talk to the community health team and find out if they're using one locally, then it will be familiar to when people come to use it. What was also developed during COVID was actually Learning Disability England, wasn't some families involved in Learning Disability England with the British Institute of Human Rights. This COVID grab and go guide, which was a version of a hospital passport, but very much geared to that really essential information around COVID, particularly around some of the symptoms around temperatures and respiratory needs and things like that. So again, that is really useful to look at that. And there's some other questions in the guidance I wrote that add on to that as well that would be useful. Some learning disability nurses contributed ideas about what would be useful to information to gather and have available. And oh yes, also in that guide, in the emergency planning guidance I did for COVID, there's a checklist to take to hospital. Again, geared to COVID, but actually it's probably quite a good, useful list that you might want to have a look at. The other thing that I think hopefully people are knowing more about, and learning disability liaison nurses, but I don't think they're known about enough. But they have a role in acute hospitals to help people cope with hospital care, and to help doctors and nurses understand about care with learning disabilities. So they're that bridge, that liaison role. So it's really useful to know the name and phone number of your liaison nurse, and don't always go to their immediate hospital. And if your relative is being admitted to hospital, you know, ask to be put in touch. Ask, is there a liaison nurse in this hospital? And ask them, would they make, you know, either ask for the details or to be put in touch with them. Oh, sorry, we have got rid of that question, which is actually maybe we haven't got rid of it. We decided that probably wasn't time for it. Okay, so this is just to make sure you know where to find the guidance and templates. So it's all on the Together Matters website. It's under resources and information. Sorry, I've just realized I haven't put the link in there, but hopefully it's on the next page. But if you go onto the website, then there's resources and information. So go on that, and the emergency planning are the two resources at the top of that page. So as I said, there's the one that's specifically around planning around COVID, and then the bits from the Thinking Ahead guide have been taken out and put together into one document, one PDF that's there as well. So they're both very easy to access. So that's the link to the Together Matters website. So for people who weren't at the last webinar, these are the links to the Thinking Ahead guides. So with both guides, there's both a version to print or to just read online, and then there's an interactive version that you can download it, you can fill in the templates, and it obviously is much easier to share with people and ask people to contribute their ideas, or keep it updated and review it. And both guides, you can download the whole thing, or you can just do individual sections. So if you just want to download, say, in I'm Thinking Ahead, actually I haven't really said I'm Thinking Ahead is an easy read version with just 3 sections: how to plan, how to make choices, and how to get the right housing support. And it's complementary to the more detailed planning guide for families. But yeah, you could just download one of the sections and use that. And last time we sent the Thinking Ahead leaflet out to people, so we could do that again, because I think there are quite a few people here maybe that weren't at the last one. And just to say, there's quite a lot of free resources on the Together Matters website. Those that are areas of work, obviously planning the future, which is what the 2 webinars have been about, quality of support, people with learning disabilities growing older, mutual caring, people with learning disabilities as carers, and building community connections and circles of support. And you know, we produce these resources, we run workshops and training, and we help with service and organisation development. So get in touch if you can't you've heard about a resource, you can't find it, you can't download, whatever, just I think just email. And that's again my email address to say we have a newsletter. It is very infrequent, I have to say, so you won't get overloaded with newsletters. But if you just want to know what's happening, you know, I might do more work on, say, emergency planning or something, and then I always just send it out in the newsletter. And now we're quite good timing for questions. So I think we're going to, if people put any questions in to the chat, and Rachel's going to, will that still work okay, Rachel, to do that, to gather the information? I was going to start by just asking you one question that would be wanted to follow up with. So I've sort of mentioned a few times that I think emergency planning can seem to be quite difficult for people. I'm not sure why that is. I think often it is that the local system isn't that clear, which actually I think people have answered that question. It's not it doesn't really give the reassurance people are looking for with emergency plan. It doesn't altogether feel like a really robust emergency plan. It's also quite an emotional thing, thinking about not being able to be in a position to care, do the usual care and support. And it's just practically, you know, it's like another thing to think about. And once you start thinking about what information do I need to hand on, what's in my head, it actually becomes quite huge. And I've been doing some planning with a group of families who have said this. Once I start thinking about it, it's huge. And once I start writing about one thing, I realise I also need to provide information about this. So one of the questions that, you know, maybe people might like to talk about is, you know, what do you think are the barriers to emergency planning? So people have got thoughts about that as well. Put it into the chat, and we can look at having some of those discussions as well. But are there any specific questions first? I
don't know if you want to stop sharing your screen, Christine.
Oh yeah, I'll do that.
Just so if anyone waves because they've got a question, I can see everyone. One of the questions in the chat was about if there's a like a Word version of the documents that people can fill in rather than like a PDF.
There isn't of the Thinking Ahead guide. I'm trying to think why someone would want a Word version. I mean, with the COVID one, originally it is a Word document, but I've made it into a PDF, because if you have a Word document and then you start filling it in, everything all over the place and it can end up looking very confusing. So originally I was going to do it as that, and then I thought, oh, this is going to be a bit of a mess of a document. So I was suggesting in that, where there's templates, that people copied and pasted it into a Word document and used it in that way. So that is one way of doing it. I don't know if that altogether answers the question. That isn't the Thinking Ahead. But I suppose with any of the questions, you could just put it into a, you know, write it and make a Word document. I don't know if that helps.
Jin has said in the chat as well that the PDF is editable, for whoever else asked that question.
Yes,
So
I think an editable PDF is like a Word document, but you don't get into all those problems of columns all changing and things going off onto different pages, which then, I don't know, can be quite hard to complete. So it is, I don't really think the editable PDF, it's really just a document you fill in. It's like a Word document, you're just typing into square text boxes. It is simple to use, and definitely much easier than writing it by hand and then scribbling it out and having to change.
I've also
question.
Go on, Natasha.
I've got autism and I've got other health issues, but I found my son, when he had COVID, has got severe mental health problems, and we had to become his carer. But we didn't know about this emergency plan, but we had to put something similar to do it. How really would it work? Because he's 23.
I mean, it is obviously, if someone's quite independent, and it is a kind of a bit of a negotiation about what they want. Do they want an emergency plan? Obviously someone needs to want an emergency plan, don't they? In terms of
I get that. Yeah, but it was the fact that he nearly lost. He was that poorly. It was the fact that he was in hospital for his mental illness.
Right.
And he came very close to being sectioned, so it wasn't. It wasn't the fact that he wants something. It was the fact that we had to really try to take a bit more control for his own safety.
Yes. I suppose the emergency plan, in the Thinking Ahead guide, is much more geared to the family carer becoming unwell. So it might be, a parent or other. So it's a slightly different situation, isn't it? Yeah. I think there probably are some useful things in the COVID version, but I think there was a lot of more easy read things that came out that did talk about coping with lockdown that I thought were good. So I don't know whether that's what affected his mental health.
No, it was he wasn't just through lockdown.
Right. Okay.
Okay. But thank you anyway.
That's all right. I mean, I'm happy to have a chat sort of separatly if that's useful.
No, it's okay. Thank you anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm also going to apologise because I've lost a couple of questions because my other computer kicked me out. So if we don't come to them, please do shout and let us know. Somebody asked, if you don't have a network of family and friends who want to be involved, who should you be looking for your circle of support?
I think this is a question that really does come up, and I think talking about an emergency plan with families who feel they don't have a network is really difficult. I think I would look to finding the local carers organisation and make links with them, find someone there who could help to make the plan, but also maybe get to know people and build a bit of a support network. The other thing about sometimes I was doing an emergency planning workshop and someone said, I've got no one to ask. And it's not infrequent that people do say that. Interestingly, someone else in the group said, oh, well, I've known your son for, 20 years plus. I don't mind being part of your network. So I think it's really for the support organisations, just trying to think how they can facilitate people to get to know other people who might step in. So it's also just trying to think quite broadly, and that's why I think the relationship map's quite helpful. I mean, it might be that there's paid support workers you can look to. So it might be that informal support network is difficult, but there might be someone who supports your son or daughter who really gets on well with them. They might be able to step in and be paid to do extra support during an emergency, or they might just say, I'd always be happy to come and be that interim person, make sure someone's okay for the time being until something's arranged. I do think it's a case of putting out feelers, and sometimes I don't know, it's just trying to talk to different people, like a neighbour, just having a conversation with a neighbour and just seeing where it leads, getting a sense, are they interested in being involved? Sometimes people don't know how to offer to help when they've got a neighbour who has a son or daughter relative with learning disabilities, and they don't know how to ask, or what's okay to say or do. So sometimes it's maybe just trying to have a few conversations with people and see what comes of that. I know it's not easy, and I don't think there are easy solutions to it, but I think it is still reaching out in different directions and see what happens, get connected more locally.
Alex has said.
Oh, someone's just put a nice comment in there. I can't see it all. So Jane, we did this, and there was a neighbour. Is Jane able to say? Is Jane able to come off speaker and come off silent and talk about that?
Yeah, we had. I mean, it's not learning disability, but it's my mother-in-law developed a brain tumour, and she was a very bright individual. She'd been to grammar school, and then suddenly she lost her power of speech. And so she had, she just couldn't communicate, and she found it incredibly frustrating, obviously. And we were told it would be quite quick. It actually was a year. So we were planning for 3 months, and then suddenly our plan had to become a year. And we just asked everybody, and we sort of arranged that she would be seen by somebody, whether it was a next door neighbour or a friend, or I used to go down for a couple of days a week. My brother-in-law went down at weekends. We would get the hairdresser to go in one day. So she always had a social visit every day. We had carers that would go in and make sure she hadn't fallen down the stairs and died in the night. But it was just about getting some really good social interaction for her, because I thought that was really, really important. And I think with individuals with learning disabilities, so I run an autism charity, and we have some individuals with learning disabilities, but most go to our local MenCap. And it's about actually finding something they enjoy doing, or something they want to do, not just checking that they've you know, they've eaten that day and they've had a bath and, you know, they're warm enough. It's about being, you know, purposeful in life, isn't it? Christine, you've frozen.
Oh, she has. Oh, well, hopefully she'll come back in a second.
Oh, that's really helpful. And I just saw and I'm sorry. Sorry if I
think you're
over
back,
you.
Christine.
I thought it stopped. Yes, someone else, something popped up. Someone said you find out who your friends are. And I was when I was planning last week with some families, someone who's got twins who've got quite complex behaviour. She was saying that you know, a group of parents had grown up together with their, you know, their children grown up together with the parents as a group. And she said, you know, I have got those good friends. It made her think, oh, I need to talk to them about this, about the emergency planning and how they could sort of help each other. So I think it is just looking at what you belong to, who's in your life, but also actively just trying to connect with some, if you've got a local community group, trying to get known. You get known, your relative gets known. Just try and make some local friends, you know, outside of the learning disability world. Just see what you know, just see what happens. Really, just to put a toe in the water.
Alex shared that maybe people could get in touch with their learning disability partnership boards locally, and that might be another good way to get in touch with people. And Gillian had a question about self-isolation. Do you want to come off mute, Gillian, and ask?
Hiya, yeah, sorry, it's quite a specific one. So I'm a single mum and my children both have really complex needs, so they need constant care. And if they don't have, they both need at least one-to-one. So obviously that isn't something that I can do on my own.
No.
I've been trying, we have budgets through social care and continuing care, and I've been trying to pin them down about what our emergency plan is around self-isolation, because we have a team of 7 PAs who come in and out. If we are symptomatic, those PAs will all have to go into self-isolation and we're left without care. And for 7 months, literally it was end of Feb, I first started trying to pin them down about what the contingency plans are. And all they say to me is, don't get COVID. That's all they say.
Yeah.
And I don't really know what to do, because they've said vague things like, oh, well, I'm sure we could get agency workers in and things like that. And I think that's totally unrealistic. Even with PPE, I can't imagine there'd be many agencies wanting to send people into a house where there are people who have COVID. But the kids will be at significant risk of harm if we don't have carers alongside myself. And obviously, were I to become quite unwell, then that makes the situation even worse. And I feel I've looked all over, can't find a solution, and I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah, I just completely agree with you. And it's it would be interesting if anyone in social care has got an answer to this, because it's really why I wrote the COVID guidelines, because I felt, well, there's no there must be a lot of families thinking, what if I get COVID, and what if my relative gets COVID, or just even what if I get it, but you know, potentially you both get it. And it felt like it wasn't really clear where anyone would go and get an answer to that. And I as much as I looked at it, I couldn't really, even in, you know, government guidance, it just felt it was a bit of a sort of black hole. There was no answers to it. I mean, there were some webinars that In Control did where people had talked about, you know, they'd self-isolated with 1 or 2 carers who said they would do that. So they would self-isolate with the person. But obviously that's, you know, it's a big ask, isn't it? And I mean, I haven't got an answer to that, because I was just very aware with COVID that the emergency planning that I had in Thinking Ahead did not answer anything that we were facing with COVID. It felt like this is an emergency. I didn't really say this, but it felt like this is, when I'd done all the emergency planning, never envisaged an emergency as COVID, where there was such a risk of, you know, something contagious. You had to stay at home. You couldn't get, you know, people couldn't come into you. So it wasn't just getting ill, was it? You couldn't you couldn't get treatment, they, you know, people couldn't come in and all that kind of thing. So it was just so much more complicated. And in all honesty, I don't think there's an answer to that. And it's interesting that you got an answer, just don't get COVID, because that's what it felt like. The only strategy was, you know, and I think a lot of families took this strategy of isolating. So they really, you know, they kept themselves as safe as they could because they didn't know what else was available. But it felt there wasn't really even emergency numbers out there to say, like, we're in a desperate situation, what should we do? It wasn't really clear to me. And it might be that I just didn't look in the right places, but it is why I wrote the COVID. It was just trying to address some of the bits of the picture, although that ultimately that end question, what if I do actually get it and my relative gets it, what do I do? And it seems to me a big question that really needs to be addressed in health and social care now. But I don't know if anyone's got, so sorry, it's not really a very helpful answer, but it's definitely acknowledge that seemed to, exactly, that's what I felt was happening, just don't get it. But I don't know if there's anyone who, it would be, or even in the chat, did something happen somewhere that was really reassuring for families and, gave some answers to that. Even having one number to phone to say things are really going pear-shaped, I mean, people are going to be at risk of harm.
Yeah, we've said, I mean, social services and continuing care have said, look, if you get symptoms, ring us. They are in one sense quite supportive, and they would try and support us in getting tests as quickly as possible. But even if there's a 48-hour wait for results, for my family and in my particular situation, there's an unacceptable amount of risk in terms of the kids. I mean, my son, for example, he has pica, and so he eats all manner of non-food substances, and the plaster off the walls, the carpet off the floor, so he cannot be left unsupervised because there's a very direct risk for him. And my daughter also has complex needs, including epilepsy, so she can't be sort of left to her own devices either. And as a single parent, it's an impossible task, really. But they want to be supportive, but I think ultimately, as you say, they don't have an answer either.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether some parent was talking whose daughter gets continuing healthcare, and they were saying they had sort of some money set aside. It doesn't answer that question, but have some money set aside for a contingency plan within the continuing health care. So I don't know, is that do you? I mean, that doesn't answer your question, but do you have that? Do people sorted out a contingency plan for you not being well with not in a COVID situation?
Not generally, although they are actually very supportive, and the issue wouldn't be funding. I don't think the issue would be funding. The issue is the practical question of, if everybody cares for you is self-isolating, who cares for you?
No, it was just an emergency that none of us had ever imagined, wasn't it?
I'll maybe see if we've got anybody in our membership, Gillian, who has any more ideas about that, and I'll drop you an email.
That's brilliant. I know it's it's a horrible question to ask, because I know there's kind of no answer to it, but I thought I'm asking everybody, and I was just thinking, oh well, maybe someone will have the answer. So thank you, I appreciate it.
And I do think some of the In Control, I think they were on the whole In Control webinars that I watched that were really trying to address that. So I can have a look, or you have a look.
Thank you.
If there's anything useful there.
I think someone else had their hand up before. I can't remember who it was. So do give us a wave if it was you.
Is there anyone that wants to say anything about what people think are the barriers to getting a plan written? Is there anyone who's kept thinking I ought to do that, and hasn't done it, or has done a little bit but not really got something really you know, with the detail that maybe is needed. Is there anyone who, I mean, maybe people don't want to, you know, discuss it, but if there is anyone that's sort of got ideas about that, or if there's anyone supporting carers who've got ideas what really helps people to get going with an emergency plan and get it finished and you know, ready to be implemented.
Sharon's got her hand up.
Hi, sorry, I didn't hear that. Did you say Sharon? Was that me?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, yeah, I'm a carer. So it's my daughter who I'm caring for. I don't think I have anyway heard of this planning, and most of the talk has been really useful. So thank you very much for that. But I do, you know, my daughter has autism and learning disabilities, and well, her, you know, she has challenging behaviour at times, and I've lived here, she's 27 now, and we've lived here, and I've never had a neighbour who would remotely want to help us, sadly. It would be lovely if they did, but, you know, even people in the close family don't want to know. And, you know, when you take somebody like this out in the community and the public have attacked us, they've vilified us, they've sworn at us, they've said she should be in an effing institution, that the idea of, you know, having this ready-made circle of these lovely people who would help, it's just pie in the sky for a lot of the families. And it's really emotionally hard to start trying to write something like this, because my daughter often feels unwanted, and, you know, it breaks my heart. But so sadly, I'm largely reliant on professionals who, I think the carers would do their best. But as I was saying in the chat, you know, I myself have got some health problems. I was classed as shielding. And even though the government has said shielding has ended, clearly the virus is still out there. So we do have to be very sensible and be very cautious. I cancelled all carers during lockdown because I felt the risk was too great. And I know a lot of people in my area with special needs ones to support did, either because the person being supported was shielding or somebody's family was. And the local government here has done nothing to even check up on me. I've had mental health issues as well. No phone call was made except for somebody who knew that I was on the shielding list. And even that, just that point of support once a fortnight did help. But I think they're really letting down families in our situation, you know, and just relying so much as usual on the carers. So that for me is what puts me off doing the plan, is that it's hard to think about, but actually statutory people either don't have resources or the wherewithal to fill. I've been told that even finding carers for somebody like my daughter is hard. Carers don't want to do it. Although she has got some lovely carers, of course, you know, there are some fantastic carers out there, but, you know, family struggle to even cope with her in a family setting at times. And the thought I'm not the only one sometimes doesn't reassure it. It's just heartbreaking that there's such little support.
Yeah. I'm really sorry to hear that, Sharon. And I completely agree with you, to be honest. I mean, you know, and I am aware when I talk about, you know, bring people in and everything, it's you know, the world is not, you know, our local community isn't really necessarily supportive. So it's really, I mean, hopefully it's really helpful for people who do organise support for family carers to hear that, because obviously a lot of families have said that to me, and it's very emotional and difficult to do, because it, you know, makes you face that how unaccepting neighbours, friends and family can be. I don't know if you want to send an email. It'd be interesting to have more of a conversation with you about it, if you want to email me, and because I think it's something that it just, you know, it'd be good to try and sort of do a bit more thinking about what that might be like to help families. You're breaking. Is that Sharon? You're breaking up. Was that Sharon?
I'm sorry.
Speaking.
I'll email you. Sorry.
Yeah, do no. You know, I'm not saying I've got any answers. It's, you know, there are, you know, I do try not to be, oh, this is all very easy. It's not very easy. I really do understand that, and it's, you know, some family situations it's easier than others, and actually the family situations where it's hardest to do it, it's the people that probably need the emergency plan more than others. So it is a big dilemma, and I think it's for people trying to sort out emergency planning and support for family carers. I think it's that, you know, if things can be got right for families where that is that level of difficulty, then it would probably sort out a lot of the problems for other people as well.
Anybody else have any points? I know we'll kind of come up to half past, but we'll be finishing.
I ask a question. Yeah. So in terms to the barrier for this emergency plan, actually in culture, in Chinese people, they don't really like a plan earlier because they're thinking, unlucky if you plan, something will happen. But this is the one challenge. Another challenge, yeah, just culture things. But I open up now. I try to really, you know, like wash the bite. This is a good approach. I really enjoy that. Another thing is a language barrier, because English sometimes second language, it feel really hard. So obviously, in terms to this plan, personally, you know, I found this tool, I feel very useful. I'm working for a skill for people, for family with additional need and disability. So obviously, and I run Chinese group as well. You know, we have over 10 family, but I think this approach is good for them as well. So I'm thinking I'm going to get my head down and thinking how to help this group of people. But the thing is, my head is about, because this is all English version, do you really have kinds of other language? How really this? Because what I noticed before I invite other organization to training this parents group, I'm interpreter, so we do that. But I feel they use a double time. But now I'm thinking maybe another way. I just you know, doing that and translation. So I haven't worked out yet. I don't know how your organization run. Do you really can serve this is a group the family who have underserved? Because for the moment, like a lot of research and they, or maybe the COVID, they get alarmed to realize this unserved community, they got more COVID, more difficulty. So now they want to invest the funding on it. But I don't know your organization, but obviously that is, we can talk about it. So how really, maybe we can do something slightly differently.
Yeah, maybe it's just thinking about some of those questions, how you culturally change them a bit to make them kind of hit the spot. Because I think one of the things you said is that COVID's made people think a lot more about this. I think that is for people who are organising support for carers. To me, it is a really difficult thing for people to think about emergency planning, and there's no easy solutions in often, so that's why it's difficult. But actually, COVID has really made people think, I really need to do this, because so many families have said, you know, I had that what if moment, and as Rachel talked about, and I think, yeah, it's the chance to reach families who've maybe put it off. It is particularly difficult for, because there's no easy solutions, but actually we need to use this opportunity to really help get as much in this place as possible. As much as possible in place.
Actually,
so yeah, I'd really be interested, Lucy, in because there were things from the other webinar as well, weren't there? It'd be really interesting to have a. Will you send me your email as well?
Yeah. So I quickly say something. It's more kinds of not questions about it. It's just really my thought. Obviously, this is a learning disability, the organized webinar. Obviously, the family I work in, most of them is autism. So sometimes I feel it's really this kind of really, even this approach is really designed for learning disability. But obviously in my group, the family was all almost autism, but then the learning disability, learning difficulty, and maybe other thing, slightly different, all have autism, but a different way. Sometimes I feel confused. This is approach, and people say, oh, we are learning disability webinar. So sometimes you're thinking, oh, people come here really learning these skills. Really, it's about for learning disability people. But in clinical, if you have to diagnose the learning disability, learning disability, it's very hard, because people usually has autism. That's it. They don't, diagnose more whether you have a learning disability or you have a also, that's my confusion, is learning disability and learning difficulty. So this is, but the approach, almost I feel the same. You know, what do you think? Have you reckoned these kinds of things?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's so many discussions about what terms we use, isn't there? I mean, I do use learning difficulty now. I used to use learning difficulty as learning disability in a sense, but I think there was a lot of families said they didn't. I don't know. Oh, it's a huge discussion, isn't it? When I have to say, you know, a lot of the families I plan with, whose son and daughter has learning disability and or autism, I just tend not to say and or autism. I mean, it's partly my age, I think. I know a lot of people do use that phrase probably quite correctly now. So I do think for people with autism, I think with any structure you give, it doesn't suit everyone, but take from it what is useful. So I'm not saying this is exactly what you need to do, A, B, C, D, E, F. It's just take from it what speaks to you, what is useful for your family. So I'd always say that, you know, there might be sections, oh, that's no use. So don't fill it in, don't look at it, you know. Nothing's set in stone for me. I think it's always, I mean, talking about learning disability, it's huge, isn't it? I mean, we've had that's been obvious today, people saying, you know, what the needs of their son or daughter. So it's just really, that's why I say I think emergency planning is complicated, because it really depends on the structure of your family, the disabilities your relative has, you know, where you live, even, you know, if you're in a rural community, in a city, it's just so many aspects, you know, what resources you have. So it's just trying to make all these things, all this sort of planning work for you and your relative. We probably ought to stop. I'm just conscious that it's hard for people when they feel they need to go, and we've run over by about 10 minutes, haven't we? Is there anything we want to sort of say finally, Rachel? Is anything from Learning Disability England's point of view? I mean, I'd like to say thank you very much, and I really do hope it's been useful. I really like hearing from people, and you know, learning. Whenever I do a workshop, I learn from families. So, you know, I definitely don't think I know it all. I've just tried to put something together that helps people find a way into it all. So, you know, really, I'm really interested in hearing from people, whether you're a family carer or whether you work somewhere and you've managed to find some solution to these things, however small, because I'm always updating things. Things can go in there and these ideas can be shared or just like learn together. So I really, please, you know, get in touch.
I think I would just echo that point about getting in touch. I saw that Mary and then a couple of other people commented about LDE doing something more around supporting families and meetings and things. And we haven't got a huge capacity, but we want to use that in the most helpful way. So if there's things that would be particularly useful, you can drop me an email and we can see how we can make things work. Or if other people in the membership are doing those things and we can connect you into that, we can do that too. So if there's something that you think would be useful, do let me know and I can try and find a way of making things work. Yeah. But otherwise, I think I just want to say thank you to Christine for doing this and thank you to all of you for coming. I hope it's been really helpful. It's been lovely to see some of you again who can.
Yes, thank you.
Great. We'll hopefully see some of you at other ones. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.